A waitress spoke on the phone in Dutch, so smooth, so flawless, it didn't match her faded uniform or the mop still damp in her hand. She thought no one noticed. But across the marble lobby, a billionaire stopped mid-step. His eyes locked on her, like he'd just heard a secret he wasn't supposed to know. A manager's jaw clenched. In less than 60 seconds, that one phone call would unravel a web of silence, prejudice, and power. She was just a maid until she wasn't, and nothing would ever be the same again. It had started just a few moments earlier. Amara Fields was crouched beside a towering orchid display in the Ritz-Carlton lobby, wiping a faint scuff off the marble floor. The clinking of breakfast cups echoed from the cafe. Guests passed by in polished shoes and perfume-slicked auras too important to notice the woman. Then came the vibration. Brrrs. Brrrs. The phone buzzed in the pocket of her apron. It shouldn't have. Phones were banned during cleaning shifts, especially in common areas. But when she glanced down and saw the number Netherlands country code, her heart punched the inside of her ribs. She stepped behind the floral display, lowered her, "I appreciate your call, Professor. Yes, I'm available." The voice on the other end belonged to Professor Willem de Graaf from the University of Utrecht. After 6 rejections, this was the man who could change everything. He was calling to say her application had been reconsidered. Despite a missing motivation letter, her academic publications and linguistic portfolio had stood out. As they spoke, something shifted in Amara. The nervous tension in her voice dissolved into certainty. Her Dutch flowed effortlessly, fluid and resonant, her accent so native-like it would have startled a linguist. She spoke about her passion for language, her long-held dream of pursuing her master's in intercultural communication, and how she'd been waiting for this call for years. She didn't notice the silence falling around her. She didn't see the tall man in the bespoke charcoal suit just steps away, pausing mid-conversation. She didn't see the woman with the red blazer and clipboard, Sarah Barrett, housekeeping manager, approach from the opposite end of the lobby, face tight with fury. But they saw her, and they heard every word. Amara ended the call with a soft, "Thank you again. I'll wait for your follow-up. Have a great day." Then added quickly in a whisper, "I'll call you back." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, and turned. Barrett's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Fields, my office. Now." The walk to the employee elevator felt endless. With every step, the invisible world that Amara lived in, the world behind, the luxury beneath the glamour, pressed in tighter. She knew what was coming. She'd broken a rule. But more than that, she'd been seen in a way she wasn't supposed to be. Not here, not like that. Inside the cramped, windowless office, Barrett didn't sit. "You know the rules," she said, arms crossed. "No personal calls, especially not in the lobby." "And what was that French?" Dutch. Amara replied quietly. "I don't care if it was Martian," Barrett snapped. "What matters is that the owner of this entire hotel, Mr. Kingsley, saw a cleaning lady standing around chatting in some foreign language like she was on vacation." She emphasized cleaning lady, the way some people say nobody. Amara stood still, not blinking, not folding, just burning inside. "You're being reassigned to the convention center bathrooms. Starting today, double shifts, no overtime. Maybe there you can speak all the Dutch you want without embarrassing the hotel." Embarrassing, she listened to white receptionists, take personal calls, laugh on speakerphone, even live stream parts of influencer meet and greets without consequence. But Amara, one quiet foreign-sounding phone call was enough to be dragged back underground. She nodded. Because what else could she do? That night back in the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates, she sat on the edge of her twin mattress, staring up at the framed degree hanging crookedly on the peeling wall. UCLA, Bachelor's in Linguistics, Cultural Anthropology minor. Cum laude. She'd applied to dozens of positions, internally, externally. International Relations Translation, guest experience. 12 times just within Kingsley International. No interviews, not even a rejection email half the time. She'd been told smilingly sometimes you're overqualified, or you're not the right cultural fit, or the worst one. "We'll keep your resume on file." The message was always the same. "You don't belong in this room." Still, she got up the next morning, showered, laced her shoes, tied her hair into a bun. She was not going to give Barrett the satisfaction of breaking her. If she was being pushed down, she would go down standing straight. As she clocked in at the service desk, a voice called out from reception. Amara Fields HR wants to see you. Executive floor. Her heart jumped. That floor was reserved for board meetings and global strategy teams. Cleaning staff didn't go there unless something had gone very wrong. In the elevator, executives surrounded her speaking in clipped tones about quarterly forecasts and client meetings. No one made eye contact. She didn't expect them to. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, she was met by a calm woman in HR. Ms. Fields, Mr. Kingsley has requested to see you. Amara didn't breathe. Mr. Kingsley, the man who saw her yesterday, the billionaire who owned the hotel chain. She followed the HR rep down a quiet hallway where the carpet silenced every step. And though she was surrounded by glass walls and skyline views, the only thing she could hear was her own heart. Because in that moment, she didn't know what was waiting for her behind that polished mahogany door, a second punishment or the first opportunity she'd ever been allowed to touch. If this story hit a nerve, or if you've ever felt like Amara unseen, unheard, underestimated, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us share real stories about justice, resilience, and voices that refuse to be silenced. Question for you. If you were Amara and someone punished you for letting your brilliance show, what would you do? A. Stay silent to keep your job. B. Speak your truth, even if it costs you everything. Comment your answer below. We're listening. The morning after the reprimand, Amara Fields stepped into the back corridor of the Ritz-Carlton's Convention Center, her reflection warping against the stainless steel doors of the janitor's closet. The walls here were cold, unfinished, lined with exposed pipes and the faint hum of industrial fans. This was the part of the hotel no guest ever saw, the underbelly where dignity often went to die. The mop handle in her grip felt heavier than usual. Not from its weight, but from what it represented. Barrett's punishment wasn't about cleaning bathrooms. It was about erasure. Amara had been seen in the lobby, had dared to be more than what her uniform implied, and now she had to be hidden, scrubbed from the polished floors like a scuff that didn't belong. The convention center was vast and lifeless in the early hours. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the white tile floor. Amara moved silently from stall to stall, cleaning in a trance, her mind spiraling inward. Each swipe of the disinfectant cloth felt like a ritual, an attempt to wash away not dirt, but the insult still burning under her skin. She wasn't just tired, she was hollowed out. 6 years of showing up. 6 years of clocking in early, folding towels with geometric precision, memorizing phrases in Japanese, Mandarin, German just in case. 6 years of submitting her resume with quiet hope and receiving only silence in return. It wasn't that she hadn't earned more. It was that no one believed she could be more. Or worse, they didn't care. She rinsed out her gloves in a utility sink, staring at the rust-colored streak in the basin. The water gurgled, then spiraled away, taking nothing with it. Just like all the promises she'd once made to herself. There had been a time not so long ago when Amara believed that talent always found a way to rise. That hard work, credentials, and integrity could break through any ceiling. But time has a way of softening dreams, of wearing them down, like stone under rain's slow, invisible erosion. She was 32 now. Her linguistics degree from UCLA hung on the wall of her shared apartment, framed with cheap wood and peeling at the edges. Next to it, a cluster of printed certificates, cultural fluency in Mandarin, advanced business Dutch honors in language structure and semantics. Each one a small fire she had lit in the dark. None of them had opened a single door. At first she thought maybe it was timing, then maybe it was luck, then maybe it was her resume layout. She'd reformatted it 5 different ways. She'd rewritten her cover letter until the words felt like dust in her mouth. But eventually you stop wondering what's wrong with your application and start realizing what might be wrong with the system. That afternoon, during her break, she sat on an overturned supply bucket in the maintenance corridor, chewing slowly on a dry granola bar. The radio buzzed softly in the background, the announcer's voice muffled by static. Across from her, a co-worker, Maria, folded cleaning cloths with quiet efficiency. "You look like your soul needs a nap," Maria said, not unkindly. Amara smiled faintly. "Just a long week." Maria paused, then reached into her tote bag and handed Amara a foil-wrapped tamale. "Eat something made with love. It helps." Amara took it with a quiet, "Thank you," unwrapped it slowly. The smell of masa and slow-cooked spices rose like a memory from childhood kitchens. It grounded her, reminded her of where she came from, of who she still was. Maria didn't ask questions. She didn't have to. They were both women who lived beneath the surface, carrying stories, degrees, and full lives in silence. There was a kind of sisterhood in invisibility, an unspoken understanding forged by dismissal. Later that night back home, Amara sat by the window of her bedroom. Her roommates laughed in the next room, unwinding from their nursing shifts, but she couldn't join them. She was holding a rejection letter number 50-something, this one from a nonprofit working with immigrant families. They had praised her linguistic profile, but said she didn't have the organizational culture match. She traced the edge of the paper, imagining it as a blade. What did a culture match even mean? She opened her laptop and pulled up the motivation letter she had sent to Utrecht. Her words stared back at her, passionate, articulate, rooted in lived experience. She read them again, not to edit, but to remember herself. At the bottom she had written, "Language is not just communication. It is dignity. It is access. It is identity. When you strip someone of that, you take more than their words. You take their place in the room." She had forgotten she wrote that, but it was the truest thing she'd ever put down. And that's when she saw the notification, an internal company bulletin posted to the staff portal. Something about multilingual opportunities for the upcoming International Business Forum. Amara clicked on it instinctively. It was a general call for internal language volunteers to support guest check-ins and translation booths during the summit. Her heart flickered. The posting was dated 4 days ago. The deadline had passed. Still, she opened a new email, attached her resume, and typed a brief message. "Dear HR, I know the deadline has passed, but I'd like to express interest in assisting with the International Business Forum. I speak 7 languages fluently, including Dutch and Japanese. I've worked at this hotel for 6 years and would welcome any opportunity to contribute." She hovered over the send button. Her finger trembled, not with fear, but with exhaustion. Then she clicked. Send. The email disappeared into the void. She didn't expect a reply. She didn't expect anything at all. But somewhere in a sleek office lined with glass and filtered air, someone would read her name. Again. And this time, maybe they wouldn't look away. She closed her laptop, stared at the city lights flickering like scattered thoughts. She still had questions. She still had bruises. But she also had a voice. And this time she'd used it, even if no one answered. Not yet. The summons came the next morning, as suddenly and silently as a shift in the wind. Amara Fields had barely stepped through the service hallway of the convention wing when the voice came through the hotel radio, static, clipped and firm. "Housekeeping, Amara Fields. Please report to Human Resources." Immediately, she froze mid-step, mop handle in hand, surrounded by rows of stacked chairs and half-cleared catering trays. A whisper of breath escaped her lips, the kind that comes before impact. HR. Immediately, in the world Amara occupied, where promotions were whispers and punishments, where thunder being called to HR out of the blue was rarely a good sign. She'd known too many co-workers who had entered that glass-doored office, only to be escorted out hours later. Uniforms returned, heads bowed, names erased. Still she moved. What else could she do? She placed the mop carefully back in the supply closet, took off her gloves and wiped her palms on her uniform. Then she walked. Through the hallway, past the freight elevator, past the same receptionists who once complimented her English like it was a party trick. This time, no one looked at her. Or maybe she didn't care to notice. The elevator to the executive floor opened with a muted ding, its brushed chrome doors parting like a gate to another world. The air changed as soon as she stepped out. It was colder, sharper, still. No chemical cleaners or stale conference food here, just glass oak and the faintest trace of citrus diffused into the air. It smelled like power, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice. The receptionist at the executive desk stood when she saw her. "Miss Fields, right this way. Mr. Kingsley is expecting you." Expecting her. That phrase hit her harder than the call itself. She followed the woman down a corridor she had only glimpsed once, when the door to the boardroom had been left ajar, and she'd caught a sliver of chandelier light and leather chairs. That moment had haunted her, but this time she wasn't cleaning fingerprints from the doorknob. She was walking through it. The office was larger than her apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the San Francisco skyline like an oil-painting morning fog curling around the tops of distant towers. A sleek desk sat to the side, but it was the man near the center of the room who drew her gaze. Graham Kingsley didn't look like the caricature of a billionaire. No arrogance, no cold detachment, just a calm alertness as if he was always listening for the one sound that mattered most. He stood when she entered. "Ms. Fields," he said, "thank you for coming up." She nodded, unsure of where to place her hands. She clasped them in front of her like she was still holding a mop. "I asked to speak with you," he continued, "because of what I heard yesterday. In the lobby." "Dutch, correct?" "Yes," she replied softly. "I was speaking with a professor from the University of Utrecht. I figured as much." I recognized the accent. He walked to a side table, poured 2 glasses of water, and handed her one. The gesture was disarming, almost human. "I'm going to be direct," he said, settling into a chair across from her. "I requested your file from HR last night. I read your resume, your application history, your credentials." Amara's breath caught. UCLA honors graduate, fluent in 7 languages including Japanese, Mandarin, Dutch, and Swahili. Multiple publications in peer-reviewed journals. 6 years of frontline labor here. 12 internal applications, none acknowledged. He paused. Why? She met his gaze for the first time. There was no bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion that had aged into quiet certainty. "I don't know. I was told I wasn't a cultural fit, that I lacked hospitality experience, that the roles were already filled." He nodded slowly, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Tomorrow this hotel is hosting an international business forum. Dutch and Japanese delegates among others. We've spent $50,000 on outside translation services. I have a suspicion that half of that will need rework." She raised an eyebrow. "And I need someone on the inside who speaks both languages, who understands nuance, and who can mediate without needing to be introduced twice." Amara's heart thudded. "You want me to clean the conference rooms?" Kingsley chuckled, not unkindly. "I want you to run our international guest relations for the event. Temporarily for now. You'd report directly to me. You'd have full system access, a temporary pay of $500,000 a week, and authority to make critical language-related decisions." She blinked. "Why me?" "Because I've heard hundreds of people speak Dutch," he said. "But I've never heard anyone command it like that while holding a mop. Because your resume reads like an international consultant's. Because if I don't intervene now, I'd be complicit in a system that rewards mediocrity with opportunity while silencing brilliance behind closed doors." She said nothing, letting the moment settle. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said. "Let's begin." Kingsley stood and extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Fields." As she left the office, badge in hand, she passed Sarah Barrett in the hallway. The older woman stopped mid-step, her eyes darting to Amara's outfit, no longer a uniform but a tailored navy blouse and slacks. "Fields," she snapped, "what are you doing up here?" Amara turned calm and steady. "Working," she said, "as the new international guest liaison for the conference, at Mr. Kingsley's request." Barrett's face paled, her jaw tightening like a fist. But Amara didn't wait. She continued down the hall. For the first time in 6 years, no one looked through her. She had been invited to the table, and she wasn't planning to leave. By the time the sun dipped behind the San Francisco skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the glass facade of the Ritz-Carlton, Amara Fields was no longer wearing a housekeeping uniform. Instead, she stood in front of a full-length mirror in the HR office, buttoning a navy blue blazer that still smelled like plastic wrap and fresh fabric dye. It wasn't tailored, not yet. It had been pulled from a backup wardrobe rack meant for last-minute VIP emergencies, but it fit well enough. She stared at her reflection for a long moment. Same eyes, same hands. But something had shifted behind them. Not confidence. Not yet. But a recognition of presence, like a figure slowly emerging from fog. Her new badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. Amara Fields, International Guest Liaison. Executive access. Just hours ago, her hands were raw from bleach, her shoulders tight from scrubbing industrial sinks. Now she was headed to the executive planning room, where the International Business Summit's final preparations were underway. The room where decisions were made in 6-digit increments, and people like her were rarely, if ever, invited. She clutched her notepad as she walked through the service corridor that led to the main floor. Her steps were light, deliberate, each one a quiet rebellion against 6 years of invisibility. In her ear, the hum of hotel machinery was replaced by her own heartbeat, steady but loud like drums, preparing for something sacred. When she entered the boardroom, conversation halted for half a second, not from rudeness, but from surprise. A few department heads looked up with professional curiosity, some with skepticism. They saw her badge. Some nodded, others didn't. Graham Kingsley was already there, standing at the head of the table with his sleeves rolled up, studying a projection of guest arrival data. He glanced up and gave her a quick, affirming nod. "Right on time, Miss Fields." The room shifted again. This time people leaned in. Amara took a seat at the far end of the table. She didn't try to shrink. She didn't fidget. She just listened, her pen poised, her presence deliberate. Her ears picked up every tone, every layer of tension hidden in formalities. When it came time to discuss translation protocols and guest experience, Kingsley turned to her. "Ms. Fields, walk us through your recommendations." She stood. Her voice was clear, low, and certain. Not overly polished, not academic, just human. "I've reviewed the current welcome materials for both the Dutch and Japanese delegations. There are several cultural missteps in the phrasing, nothing offensive, but enough to weaken rapport. I've adjusted the scripts to better reflect hierarchical sensitivities in Japanese business culture, and I've localized the Dutch phrasing to better match regional idioms. For example, instead of welcoming them with global partnership, which is vague, I suggest salmon working met betekenis, which means meaningful collaboration. It's more personal." Silence followed. Then came the quiet scratch of pens and the soft hum of a laptop keyboard. People were taking notes. One of the senior directors, a man named Carver with hair like brushed silver, raised an eyebrow. "You're not just a translator, are you?" "No," she replied. "I'm a linguist." A ripple of subtle acknowledgement passed through the room. Kingsley smiled, saying nothing, but Amara could feel it in the way he leaned back slightly, as if confirming a silent bet with himself. After the meeting, as the others dispersed, Amara stayed behind to help cross-check digital files. Kingsley approached her quietly. "You read the room well," he said. "It's what I've always done," she replied, closing her laptop. "Just not in rooms like this." He nodded once. "You belong here." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. As she stepped out into the hallway, she ran into someone she hadn't expected to see. Gerald Henson, the director of hotel operations. His face was smooth, controlled, too controlled. He was a man used to managing outcomes. He looked at her with something that was not quite disdain, not quite curiosity, a calculation. "Miss Fields," he said, extending a hand. "Impressive showing in the briefing." "Thank you," she replied, shaking his hand without hesitation. "I'm sure Barrett was surprised," he added with a thin smile. "She seemed unprepared," Amara said evenly. Henson chuckled, then moved on. That night, back in her apartment, Amara sat in front of her laptop reviewing the translated event packets for the summit. She cross-checked the Japanese documents and caught something that made her stomach tighten. A key section referring to partnership terms used a phrase that could be interpreted as condescending when applied to a superior in Japanese hierarchy. It was subtle, but to a native speaker it would read as a power play. She opened the original translator's document and noticed another inconsistency, then another. Her pulse quickened. These weren't just small errors, they were systemic. She compared the English originals, the vendor's versions, and her own revisions. Something was off, very off. She opened the internal vendor approval file. The translation company listed Lingua One Solutions was the same firm used for the last 3 major events. She did a quick search. No certifications, no verifiable credentials in Japanese or Dutch. The listed lead translator's credentials traced back to a now-defunct college in Utah, and the company's primary contact, Ashley Hanley, a name Amara had never heard. But a quick LinkedIn search revealed the missing puzzle piece. Ashley was Gerald Henson's niece. Amara leaned back in her chair. So that's why the documents were riddled with flaws. So that's why her own transfer requests had gone unanswered. She wasn't just up against indifference. She was up against something designed to keep her out. She sat in the dim light of her room, fingers steepled under her chin, the city humming softly outside her window. She could say nothing, stay in her new role, keep her head down, or she could say everything and risk losing the one chance she'd finally been given. She stared at the screen, then she opened a new folder on her desktop and titled it Project Atlas. She began saving files. Not because she was angry, not because she wanted revenge, but because truth deserves light. And this time she was in the room with her eyes wide open. The next morning the city was wrapped in mist, the kind that seemed to blur both windows and certainty. Amara Fields sat at her desk in the small, temporary executive workspace she'd been assigned, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. Outside, the hum of the hotel's international summit was rising, foreign accents drifting through the corridors. Laughter over breakfast meetings, briefcases wheeled across marble with the rhythm of negotiations. Inside, her screen was filled with receipts, contracts, and translation files that didn't add up. The deeper she dug into the translated materials for the Dutch and Japanese delegations, the more disturbed she became. At first, she thought the errors were innocent misinterpretations, maybe, or the byproduct of a rushed process. But the mistakes weren't just linguistic. They were cultural fractures. In Japanese, a phrase had been translated to imply hierarchical disrespect, something subtle but severe enough to potentially unravel trust. In Dutch, idioms had been warped into phrases that sounded robotic and cold, missing the warmth and relational nuance essential to partnership building. Amara knew these things not because she was guessing, but because she lived in the nuance. Language wasn't just vocabulary to her, it was tone history power. These mistranslations weren't small, they were dangerous. She opened a copy of the most recent invoice from Lingua One Solutions, the vendor contracted for all translation work at the summit. The total cost, $52,600. That alone made her blink. For just 2 languages at limited scope, that number was outrageous. She opened the vendor's profile again. No professional certifications, no record of advanced language credentials, no portfolio of diplomatic or international work. But what caught her attention next froze her hand on the mouse. The listed owner, Ashley Hanley. The name was unfamiliar, but the point of contact listed on the internal approval form, Gerald Henson. Amara sat back, a chill crawling down her spine. Gerald Henson, the director of hotel operations, the man who had offered her a handshake wrapped in calculation, a man with the power to greenlight internal transfers or quietly bury them. She searched public business records and employee directories. Ashley Hanley was Henson's niece, 29 years old, a marketing graduate from a non-accredited online college. No record of language certification, no publication history. Yet she was being paid tens of thousands to deliver translations that could jeopardize the hotel's international standing. This wasn't just carelessness. This was nepotism wrapped in a paper trail. Amara stood up, pacing the small space, her breath quickening. Her thoughts clashed like cymbals, loud, erratic. She wasn't surprised, not really. But knowing and proving are 2 different things. And now in her hands, she held the first piece of something much bigger than mistranslations. She had choices. One option was to stay quiet, to keep the temporary position, do her job well, and let the storm pass. That path had a paycheck and perhaps a title. But the other path, the harder one, was truth. Not polite truth, not professional phrasing, but truth that could rattle the bones of a system built to keep voices like hers on mute. She returned to her seat and opened a secure folder she'd named the night before Project Atlas. Into it, she dropped the vendor record, screenshots of errors, email correspondence between Henson and the procurement team, and a side-by-side comparison of the mistranslations against her corrected versions. Then she sent a message to someone she trusted. Elena Park, the junior HR analyst, who had welcomed her into the executive floor with cautious warmth. Elena had once confessed that she'd seen Amara's resume months ago and couldn't understand why she was in housekeeping. Now Amara was ready to let her see everything. The message was simple. I've found something I need you to see. It affects all of us. Less than 10 minutes later, Elena was in her office, face pale as she scrolled through the files. This is massive, Elena whispered. Amara nodded. I think it's been happening for years, and not just with me. Together they pulled up hiring records, archived resumes, promotion decisions. Patterns emerged like ink in water-qualified multilingual candidates rejected repeatedly. Applicants marked as overqualified or not a cultural fit, and many of those denied happened to share one thing: skin tone. Elena typed furiously, cross-referencing data. You're not imagining this. There's a pattern, Amara. It's not just you. It's the whole infrastructure. By midday, they brought in Diego Alvarez, the quiet IT staffer who'd once brought Amara coffee at 2 a.m. Diego was sharp and, more importantly, discreet. Within hours, he traced system logs that revealed something else. Internal alerts had been raised about Lingua One's credentials months ago, but were marked as resolved by Henson himself. They had documentation, timelines, emails, names. And it wasn't just one department. It was multiple layers of influence protecting mediocrity, funneling money to family, and silencing dissent. As the sun began to dip, turning the windows to molten gold, Amara stared at the wall of evidence they had built. She thought of the years she had spent waiting for someone to notice her, the days scrubbing floors, practicing pronunciation in supply closets, hoping each email she sent might be the one that changed her life. No one came for her, so now she would be the one who came for others. Not to burn down the house, but to pull the curtains wide open and let the light in. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. She didn't want a spotlight. She wanted a system where brilliance didn't need to be discovered, it was simply allowed to shine. The printer whirred beside her, spitting out pages like a pulse. Elena handed her a final folder filled with comparison charts and flagged communications. Amara looked down at the growing stack. She knew what this meant. It meant standing in a room full of powerful people and telling them the system they trusted was broken. It meant risking everything she had just been given. It meant refusing once and for all to be invisible. And as she zipped up her blazer and walked toward the elevator that would carry her to Kingsley's office, her reflection caught for a moment in the polished chrome doors. She didn't look afraid. She looked ready. The hallway to Graham Kingsley's office stretched longer than Amara Fields remembered. With every step, her heels tapped against the marble like a quiet metronome, counting down to something irreversible. In her hand, she clutched a manila folder packed tight with truths, documents, charts, emails, and enough inconsistencies to shake the floor beneath the gleaming hotel empire they stood on. Outside the executive office, the air was still, crisp, almost too clean, like the silence before a courtroom verdict. The receptionist looked up and nodded once, then pressed the intercom. "She's here." The door clicked open. Amara stepped inside. Kingsley was at his desk, back turned to the view outside, watching the distant bay blur into fog. He didn't rise this time. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit," he said. She did, spine straight, throat dry. Kingsley finally turned to face her. He looked more weathered than before, like someone who had seen too much too fast too soon. "You brought something?" he asked. Amara opened the folder, slid the papers across the desk, and began to speak. Not rushed, not emotional, but with the kind of clarity born from too many years of silence. She showed him the inflated invoices from Lingua One Solutions, the falsified credentials, the connection to Gerald Henson through his niece Ashley Hanley. The patterns in the hiring records qualified multilingual staff overlooked, flagged as not a fit. The flagged internal concerns that had been dismissed by the very people who had something to hide. She laid out every page with the precision of a surgeon cutting into the soft tissue of corporate comfort. Kingsley said nothing at first. His fingers moved slowly along the edge of the folder. His eyes scanned the documents, then returned to her face. "You're certain," he said finally. "I've cross-verified everything. Elena and Diego helped. Every signature, every transaction, every block transfer." His silence was not disbelief, it was weight. It was the silence of a man realizing the structure he had built. The brand he had expanded with pride had been quietly corroded from within. "This doesn't just affect the translations," Amara said. "It's cost us talent, money, credibility, lives. People like me who were qualified, ready, willing to serve, were passed over for nepotism and mediocrity." Kingsley leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking under the strain. He looked older now, not in years, but in responsibility. He ran a hand over his mouth, then nodded once. "I need time to process," he said. "But you did the right thing bringing this forward." She exhaled, not relief, not triumph, but the release of pressure that had been sitting on her lungs for 6 years. Just then the office door burst open without a knock. Gerald Henson strode in like a man who still believed the world bent to his voice. He looked from Amara to Kingsley, eyes narrowing. "Graham, I just got off the phone with the Dutch team. They're questioning some of the translations. This," he pointed at Amara, "must be the issue." Kingsley stood slowly. "No," he said, voice calm. "You are." Henson froze. Excuse me, I've reviewed the documents, Kingsley continued. The payments, the credentials, the connections. Lingua One is not certified, not qualified, and the owner is your niece. You personally pushed through the approvals. Henson's face paled, then flushed with a quick, hot red. This is absurd. She's fully capable. She's never studied Japanese. Amara said, her voice calm, unwavering, and she translated a key phrase using a term that implies inferiority to a superior. That's why they're questioning the materials. You're just a maid, Henson spat, rage bubbling to the surface. A maid pretending to be important. Kingsley's eyes narrowed. She is the reason this summit hasn't collapsed already, and as of today, she's also the reason we're conducting a full internal audit. The silence crackled between them. I want your resignation, Kingsley said. Today, or you'll be terminated for cause. Henson sputtered, but the room had already closed around him. The power was gone, sucked out like air from a sealed chamber. He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. Kingsley turned back to Amara. There will be fallout, he said. You'll get questions, pressure, but I'll stand behind you. I didn't do this to bring anyone down, she said. I did it to stop the silence. He nodded once. Good. Then let's make the noise worth it. Later that day, Amara stood at the edge of the grand ballroom as preparations for the summit continued. Delegates were arriving in waves, the room buzzing with a symphony of languages, Japanese, Dutch, Mandarin, French. She moved among them effortlessly, switching tongues like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Her voice no longer hidden, no longer a whisper in the back of a hallway. One of the Dutch delegates approached her mid-conversation. Excuse me, he said. Are you the same Amara Fields who published the article on linguistic equity in corporate spaces, the one cited in the Journal of Applied Semantics? I am, she said. He smiled broadly. I've quoted you. Twice. It's a pleasure to meet you. In that moment, surrounded by business leaders and diplomats, Amara wasn't just seen, she was recognized. Not as a maid, not as a translator, but as a mind, a force, a voice. And as she walked past the hall, where Henson had once sat in silent judgment, past the room she used to clean in silence, she no longer looked at the floors. She walked tall because now the walls knew her name. The executive auditorium had never been this quiet. Every leather chair was filled, the front rows lined with department heads, senior managers, and international guests whose suits were as stiff as their expressions. The rear seats, usually reserved for overflow or forgotten junior staff, were packed with housekeepers, kitchen workers, bellhops, and night clerks, many still in uniform. The division between the two sides of the room was unspoken yet painfully visible. In the center of the stage stood Graham Kingsley, his suit darker than usual, his shoulders squared. At his side, slightly behind him but steady, stood Amara Fields. The room had been called together without explanation, an emergency assembly, unusual and unsettling. The kind that preceded either a corporate pivot or a scandal. The air was taut, stretched tight like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Kingsley stepped to the microphone. His voice, when it came, was calm but heavy like thunder, muffled by distance. For years, he began, this company has prided itself on luxury excellence and global sophistication. But those words, like many polished things, can hide what lies beneath. And today we can no longer afford to let that happen. He paused, scanning the room. No one shifted, no one whispered. Even the air vents seemed to still. He continued. Over the past several weeks, we've uncovered evidence of internal corruption, systemic discrimination, and the suppression of qualified talent. This wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern, one that cost this hotel not just financially, but morally. And we cannot, will not look away from it. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Gerald Henson Kingsley said, has been terminated for cause following a detailed investigation into fraudulent vendor practices, nepotism, and the blocking of internal advancement based on race and class. Several others are under formal review. And effective immediately, we are launching a company-wide audit of all hiring and promotion decisions made over the past 5 years. Gasps, low and sharp, rose from the executive row. But in the back of the room, among the overlooked and overworked, there was only stillness. Then one clap, another, a ripple of quiet, cautious applause that slowly gained volume as the truth settled into place. Kingsley turned slightly toward Amara, and for the first time the room's focus shifted. He didn't introduce her with fanfare. He didn't need to. "Miss Fields," he said simply. "Would you like to speak?" Amara stepped forward. She wasn't wearing a uniform today, nor a power suit, just a simple, elegant black dress that allowed her presence to speak louder than fabric. Her voice when she began was clear and slow, the kind that didn't ask for attention, it claimed it. "My name is Amara Fields," she said. "Some of you may know me as the woman who cleaned your offices, who brought towels to your suite, who scrubbed the floor while you held strategy meetings." She let that sit. "I also have a degree in linguistics from UCLA. I speak 7 languages fluently. And I've spent 6 years in this hotel applying for internal positions that were never even acknowledged." A sharp breath escaped from somewhere in the second row. "I don't share this for pity," she continued. "I share it because I'm not the only one. I'm not special. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of employees across this company with degrees, skills, brilliance you've never seen. Not because it wasn't there, but because you didn't look." Her eyes swept the room, pausing on the executives, the managers, and then finally landing on the employees in the back, the ones who now sat a little straighter. "This company has cleaned its rooms better than it has cleaned its conscience. But today that changes. Not just because of what we've exposed, but because of what we now have the power to fix." The room held its breath. "I'm proud to accept the position of Director of Global Talent Equity. And I promise you this, I won't be the last one who rises. From now on, when you walk into this hotel, you won't just see polished floors and perfect service. You'll see people, real people who belong here, just as much as anyone in the boardroom." The applause came then, not hesitant, not forced, but thunderous. It began in the back from those who had spent their careers swallowing pride and swallowing pain, and it swept forward like a wave. After the meeting, Kingsley and Amara stood near the edge of the stage as people came to speak, some offering congratulations, others stunned into silence. Barrett, now suspended pending review, sat motionless near the wall, her face pale. She didn't approach Amara. She didn't have to. The reckoning had already spoken. Amara stepped into the hallway as a shaft of sunlight caught her shoulders, the noise behind her dimming. In her hand, she held a binder full of reform plans. Not just audits and policies, but mentoring programs, anonymous referral pipelines, scholarship frameworks. It wasn't a proposal, it was a blueprint. She passed a young employee in a kitchen apron, no older than 19, standing stiffly with wide eyes. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "I want to apply to the Elevate program." I speak 4 languages, but I never thought." Amara stopped and smiled. "Now you can," she said, "and you won't need permission to be seen anymore." As she turned the corner, heading back toward her office, the hotel didn't look different. The walls were the same. The chandeliers still glittered. The corridors still smelled of citrus and clean linen. But something in the air had shifted. Something permanent. It wasn't just justice served, it was justice begun. The days after the executive meeting moved like wind sweeping through locked doors, sudden, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Something had shifted inside the Ritz-Carlton San Francisco, but it wasn't in the walls, the chandeliers, or the velvet drapes. It was in the people, in the way their eyes lingered a little longer, in the way they looked at Amara Fields when she passed, not as a ghost of linen and silence, but as someone who had pulled the veil off everything they thought they understood. Amara didn't bask in the applause. She didn't crave it. What she wanted, what she'd always wanted, was change. Tangible, structured, measurable change. And now she had the authority to build it. Within a week, the first steps of the Elevate initiative rolled out. It began with a simple call, an internal invitation for employees at all levels to submit their stories, resumes, forgotten credentials, and unrecognized skills. No titles, no departments, just truth. No longer would a dishwashing job define a person's entire capability. No longer would accents serve as barriers to opportunity. The responses poured in. One came from Jose Rivera, a pastry cook who'd spent 6 years piping buttercream roses in silence. Attached to his email was an MBA diploma from Mexico City and a cover letter written in 3 languages. He had applied for a management trainee position 5 times. Not once had he received a reply. Another email arrived from Fatima Khalid, a housekeeping team lead who had once been an HR coordinator in Casablanca. She had training in conflict resolution and team leadership, but no one had ever asked. Her voice had been limited to "yes, ma'am," and "I'll get that cleaned right away." Then there was Marcus Bell, a night security guard. Quiet, always on time. Few people even knew his name. But in his application, he submitted a portfolio of app designs, including a prototype for a guest services interface that could automatically switch between 6 languages. He had coded it alone during night shifts, teaching himself programming between rounds. Amara read every word, and with each submission, her resolve deepened. These weren't anomalies. These were the fruits of a system that had taught people to hide their brilliance behind survival. Now she was going to crack the ceiling open for them and for those still waiting in the shadows. She assembled a small team: Elena from HR, Diego from IT, and a few new faces who understood what this movement meant not just on paper, but in soul. They called themselves the Access Team. Their goal was clear: identify talent that had been overlooked, offer them support, mentorship training, and internal mobility. Not as charity, as overdue recognition. Within 1 month, 37 internal promotions were made across 6 properties. Some were quiet reassignments. Others were cause for celebration. No fanfare, just relief, vindication, hope. Words spread like a heartbeat, quiet but rhythmic. Across the country, Kingsley International Properties in Chicago, Boston, Atlanta, and Miami began requesting program guides. General managers sent cautious emails asking, "How did you launch this, and would it work in a property like ours?" Amara replied with the same answer every time: talent already exists in your building. The question is whether you're willing to see it. Meanwhile, others weren't celebrating. In a budget hotel on the edge of Reno, Sarah Barrett folded linens in the basement laundry room. Her demotion hadn't come with a press release, just a relocation and a title stripped of power. She now managed 3 staff members and spent her days measuring bleach and sorting towels. She watched the Elevate initiative from a distance, her jaw tight as she clicked through company-wide updates. A new story appeared every week. A former dishwasher now working in logistics. A bellhop promoted to cultural liaison. A night cleaner helping develop digital translation tools. Barrett didn't speak much anymore. Sometimes silence is its own punishment. Meanwhile, Amara received an envelope at her desk, unmarked international postage. Inside was a postcard of Utrecht's canals and a folded letter. "Dear Ms. Fields, it has been a pleasure watching your rise. Your application, once overlooked, has now become a case study in resilience. We would be honored to offer you a visiting lecturer position at the University of Utrecht should you ever wish to accept. Our students could learn much from you, not only in language but in justice." Warmly, Professor Willem de Graaf. Amara held the card between her fingers, her eyes fixed on the postcard image. A small boat floating down a tree-lined canal. She placed the letter in her drawer not as a closure, but as a reminder. She wasn't finished here yet. In the meantime, the Access Team hosted their first diversity advancement gathering in the staff lounge. It wasn't a gala. No suits or catered trays, just folding chairs, donated snacks, and a microphone duct taped to a stand. But it was everything. Employees took turns sharing their stories. Jose spoke of his father who'd cleaned restaurant floors so his son could learn finance. Fatima read a poem about silence and survival. Marcus gave a demo of his app, drawing cheers when it translated a staff bulletin into Mandarin and Tagalog in seconds. Then Lina, a shy dishwasher who rarely spoke in meetings, stood up. Her voice trembled at first, but then found its footing. "I used to think that being quiet meant I was small, but now I know I was just waiting for space." Applause thundered through the room, not polite but primal. The kind that tells someone, "We hear you. We see you. Keep going." That night, as Amara walked through the now quiet lobby, she paused by the tall glass doors where this all began. Her reflection stared back at her, not as a stranger, not as someone who had to explain herself, but as a woman who had created something lasting. Not a moment, a movement. A ripple had become a current, and the current was only just beginning to swell. 6 months had passed since Amara Fields answered that life-altering call in the marble lobby. 6 months since the world, or at least the world she had known, cracked open like glass under pressure. Now her name appeared on the etched plaque outside a corner office on the 32nd floor of the Ritz-Carlton, San Francisco. Dr. Amara Fields, Vice President of Global Talent Equity and Inclusion. The title was new, but the gravity of it had already become part of her marrow. Her office overlooked the shimmering skyline, but it wasn't the view that made her pause each morning. It was the memory of floors she used to mop just 2 levels down. The faint smell of disinfectant still lived somewhere in her mind, like an echo of who she'd had to be before someone finally looked closely enough to see her. This morning's sunlight spilled through the windows in long golden streaks as Amara stood before her team preparing for the presentation that would define not just the next chapter of her work, but possibly an entire movement. She flipped through the final slide deck for the Invisible Talent Initiative, her own blueprint for institutional redemption. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the conference screen blinked to life. Across dozens of Kingsley International properties, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, and even one in Tokyo, managers, staff, and newly promoted employees tuned in live. The virtual room was full, but Amara's voice made it feel intimate, like each word was being spoken directly into someone's personal silence. In the past 6 months, we reviewed more than 2,000 employee profiles across departments and roles. Not resume designed for executive desks. Not filtered, formatted LinkedIn accounts. Just raw stories, histories, credentials, skill sets that had been boxed away beneath uniforms and overlooked applications. She clicked to the next slide, revealing a cascade of numbers. We identified 147 employees who were working far below their actual qualifications. 83% of them were people of color, first-generation immigrants, or multilingual professionals without traditional access to networks of influence. Her voice didn't waver, but it pressed like a soft fist against the wall of corporate apathy. They weren't hidden. They were right here. Cleaning your rooms, parking your cars, running your kitchens, answering your phones. What failed them was not ability, but access. There was a silence in the room, both digital and physical, a silence that listened. And when we gave them that access, she continued, we didn't just uplift individuals, we rebuilt performance itself. Guest satisfaction rose. Turnover fell. Translation errors disappeared. Innovation emerged. She clicked again. The screen now showed testimonials, faces of employees now in roles where they could finally breathe fully, finally contribute without fear. The next phase, Amara explained, was mentorship. Every person promoted through Elevate would be required to identify and mentor at least one other overlooked team member. It was a ripple designed to become a wave, each person not just stepping forward, but pulling someone else up with them. After the presentation ended, Amara remained still, soaking in the quiet afterward, like warmth from a fire finally lit. Her assistant Elena walked in holding a letter. From the foundation in Utrecht, she said, placing it gently on Amara's desk. Amara unfolded the letter slowly. Dear Dr. Fields, we've followed your work closely and are deeply moved by the example you've set. We'd be honored to welcome you as a visiting professor in applied linguistics and equity in global business. Our students have much to learn from your story, your resilience, and your voice. Warmly, Professor Willem de Graaf, University of Utrecht. She smiled, tracing the letterhead with her fingertips. Once that university had felt like a distant dream. Now it was a door she could walk through if she chose. But she wasn't ready, not yet. The work here wasn't finished. That afternoon, Amara visited the staff lounge with a small box tucked under her arm. Inside were applications for the new Kingsley Scholarship Fund, a program she personally funded alongside corporate partners. Its purpose was to provide educational support for employees and their children, especially those whose paths had been deferred by necessity. She met Rosa Santiago there, the daughter of Maria, the same Maria who had once handed her a warm tamale when she had nothing but exhaustion to carry home. Rosa wanted to study hotel management. She had drive instinct and a natural leadership that reminded Amara of herself years ago before her voice had been shaped by fear. This is yours, Amara said, sliding the acceptance letter across the table. Rosa blinked, hands trembling. I thought I'd always be helping Mom clean rooms, she whispered. I didn't know I could do more. You were always meant for more, Amara replied. You just needed someone to open the first door. As she left the lounge, Amara passed the hallway where she'd once been summoned for punishment, a mop in hand, hope barely alive. She paused there, letting her fingers trail along the smooth wall, remembering every step that had brought her to this moment. In a quiet hotel in Arizona, Gerald Henson now worked nights managing a roadside property. After the investigation, no luxury brand would touch him. His name had become a cautionary tale, proof that silence in leadership is not neutrality, but complicity. Ashley Hanley, once the false translator, had returned her ill-gotten earnings, completed an ethics rehabilitation program, and was now learning real Mandarin, this time with humility. Ironically, her tuition was partially covered by the language scholarship that Amara's initiative had made possible. And as for Sarah Barrett, now managing laundry at a budget hotel in Reno, she too had been forced to face the weight of decisions made in the name of pride. She watched the new Kingsley initiative unfold online, knowing that her name would never again be associated with progress. Justice, Amara had come to learn, was not just about punishing those who failed. It was about lifting those who had been failed again and again until they were finally allowed to rise. At dusk, Amara stood in her office, watching the lights of San Francisco flicker to life. She pulled out the old apron from her housekeeping days, a relic she'd kept in her drawer, not as a wound, but as a reminder. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood there, still and strong, because she knew now without doubt that her story wasn't hers alone. It belonged to every voice ever silenced, and to every door that would open next. The story of Amara Fields is not just the story of a maid who spoke Dutch in the wrong room. It is the story of how dignity, brilliance, and truth, no matter how long suppressed, can rise, reshape power, and redefine justice. At its core, this story reminds us that talent doesn't always wear a name badge that matches its worth. It often hides behind aprons, speaks in quiet tones, and waits patiently behind closed doors. But silence does not mean absence. It means the system never asked the right questions. The lesson here is clear. When we fail to see people beyond their uniforms, we miss the extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Amara didn't start a revolution with a protest. She didn't yell or fight for attention. She listened, she learned, and when the moment came, she spoke not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they were not the right fit. Through her courage, she exposed more than corruption. She exposed how deeply injustice can be normalized, especially when it hides behind professionalism policies and culture-fit excuses. Her story is a blueprint for how change happens, one voice speaking truth in a room that was never designed to hear it. One act of integrity that ripples outward until the walls start to tremble. One person brave enough to say, "I belong here," and so do others like me. But the real brilliance of Amara's journey isn't just in her rise, it's in what she built for others. She didn't stop at breaking the ceiling. She created pathways for others to rise with her. She transformed her pain into a platform, her invisibility into impact. This story is a call to action for leaders to look deeper, for organizations to listen better, and for those who've been marginalized to know this. Your value is not determined by where you start, but by who you decide to become when no one is watching. It's a reminder that justice delayed doesn't have to be justice denied. And sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with noise, but with a whisper in a forgotten corner of a marble lobby. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own journey, or of someone you know who deserves more, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel so we can continue telling real, raw, and transformative stories like this one. Every subscription is fuel for truth. Every view is a vote for voices that deserve to be heard. Because stories like Amara's don't just inspire, they ignite. And we're just getting started.